The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room. Emma sat in her leather armchair, looking out the window with a blank expression. The walls around her were adorned with expensive artwork, landscapes and portraits she had purchased with her own money after years of tireless work, pushing her limits to build a name in the world of business. She had done it all. And yet, in the silence of her grand home, surrounded by wealth and beauty, there was an emptiness she couldn't escape. She wasn't the same woman she had been when Charles had swept her off her feet. Back then, she was the ambitious woman who dreamed big, who saw the world as hers to conquer. Charles had been her partner, her support. Together, they'd built a life. But today, as the doctor's words echoed in her mind, "You have less than 6 months, Emma," she realized how much she had truly lost. The phone on the coffee table vibrated suddenly, snapping her out of her thoughts. Emma glanced at the screen, expecting another call from her assistant or perhaps a message from one of her close friends. But the number was unfamiliar, the area code distant, which only intrigued her further. She hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone. "Hello?" Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension in it. "Mrs. Blackwood, you don't know me, but I have something you need to hear," the voice on the other end said, calm but with a trace of urgency. It sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to engage with anyone today. The looming weight of her diagnosis and the unspoken tension in her marriage with Charles had already consumed her thoughts. She wasn't in the mood for more drama. But something about the voice intrigued her, pulled her in. It was as though it was meant to disrupt her life, to shatter the false peace she had been clinging to. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice betraying a hint of impatience. She didn't have much time to spare. "Your husband," the voice continued, and Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. "Charles Blackwood. He's been unfaithful. And I have the proof. You deserve to know." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Charles had always been the charming, affectionate man. Or so she thought. They'd been married for almost 15 years, and despite their ups and downs, she had never imagined he would betray her, especially not now, when she needed him most. A tight knot formed in her stomach, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about?" Emma asked, barely above a whisper, her fingers tightening around the phone. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Mrs. Blackwood," the voice said softly. "But you have the right to know. He's been seeing someone else for the last year. I have photos, text messages, everything. I'm sending it to your email now." A cold silence filled the room as Emma tried to process the words. Betrayal. Her mind raced as her eyes fixed on the phone in her hand. Charles. How could he? How could he have done this to her? "Who are you?" Emma managed to ask, her voice shaking slightly. The voice paused. "Someone who cares about the truth." And with that, the line went dead. For a moment, Emma stood still, the phone pressed to her ear as the silence overwhelmed her. The words the stranger had said hung heavily in the air, almost suffocating her. She wasn't sure what to feel: anger, betrayal, confusion. She only knew one thing for sure: she couldn't just let this slide. She couldn't let Charles get away with this. Not after everything they had built. The reality of the situation began to sink in slowly, as if it were an unraveling thread she couldn't stop. She had trusted him with her life, her health, her time, everything. And he had repaid her with deceit. The man she had poured years of her life into had turned into something unrecognizable. How long had this been going on? Who was the other woman? Her thoughts crashed into each other like waves hitting the shore, each question louder than the last. But no answers came. Only the dark void of suspicion and doubt. Her hand hovered over the phone as she debated whether to check her email. She knew it would only confirm the worst. But she couldn't stop herself. Her fingers moved almost automatically, her mind numb with the rising tide of emotions. She opened the email. There, in the subject line, it read, "Proof of his affair." A trembling breath escaped her lips as she clicked open the message. There they were. The photos. The texts. Every word, every moment, captured, Charles laughing with a woman, their hands intertwined, faces too close, smiles too familiar. Emma felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. The images were like knives, each one driving deeper into her heart. The woman in the photos wasn't anyone she recognized. But it didn't matter. It could have been anyone. What mattered was that Charles had chosen someone else. He had chosen betrayal. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but Emma refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry over this. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. She had built her empire alone. She had fought for everything she had. Charles wasn't going to be the one to destroy her. No. Her grip on the phone tightened as she stared at the screen, her mind already forming a plan. She had no time to wallow in grief or anger. She had months, at most, before the illness that was ravaging her body would take her. But this was something she could control. This betrayal would not be her last battle. As the photos burned in her mind, she closed the email and set the phone down, her fingers still twitching from the adrenaline. A plan began to take shape in her mind. One that would turn everything Charles thought he knew about her on its head. Emma Blackwood wasn't some helpless, terminally ill woman waiting for the end. She wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. No. She was going to fight. She was going to make him pay for every lie, for every tear she had shed over the years, for every moment he had taken for granted. She had worked too hard, too long, to let him ruin her now. But before she could start, she needed to confront him. She needed to see him face to face. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Emma stood frozen for a second, staring at the door. The timing was too perfect. She knew who it was. Charles. He was here. Emma didn't hesitate. She stood up, feeling the ache in her body, the weight of her illness bearing down on her, but she ignored it. She would not let him see her weakness. She would not let him see the toll his betrayal had taken on her. She was stronger than he could ever imagine. She walked to the door, her steps measured, deliberate. As her hand reached for the handle, her pulse quickened. When she opened the door, there he stood, Charles. His once boyish charm was now replaced with a look of concern, the kind of look that made Emma's blood run cold. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and hesitant. Emma didn't let him in. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Charles," she replied coldly. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. Charles's face faltered. "I'm sorry, I'm done with your apologies," Emma cut him off. Her voice was like steel now. "You've made your choices. Now, I'm making mine." Charles looked at her, his brow furrowed with confusion. He still didn't get it. He still didn't understand what he had done. "You don't know the half of it," she added, her eyes locking with his. "But you will." Before he could say anything else, Emma closed the door gently but firmly. The click of the lock was the finality of it all. Charles had no idea what he was about to face. And as Emma turned away from the door, she took a deep breath, knowing that her plan had begun. Emma stood at the threshold of her grand home, the weight of the evening's events heavy on her shoulders. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, as if it were protesting against the cold, calculated decisions that had already begun to take root in her mind. She had closed the door on Charles, but the emotional storm that had begun to brew inside her was only just starting to gather strength. Her legs wobbled slightly beneath her as she walked away from the door. The cold, sterile silence of the house pressed in on her from every direction. She had never felt so alone. The grandeur of her surroundings, the polished marble floors, the gleaming silverware, the fine art that hung on every wall, had all started to feel like a prison. The walls of this beautiful home, this monument to her success, had never felt so suffocating. They were not a sanctuary anymore. They were a reminder of all that she had lost. Her phone vibrated again, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced down at it, expecting another message from the mysterious voice that had delivered the devastating news. Instead, it was a text message from her assistant, Claire. "Emma, just wanted to check in. Is everything okay? Do you need me to cancel tomorrow's meeting?" For a brief moment, Emma considered responding. She thought about asking Claire to take over, to carry the burden for her. But she couldn't. She couldn't ask anyone to fight this battle for her. This was something she had to do herself. And deep down, she knew that she was stronger than anyone could possibly imagine. She typed a quick response. "No need to cancel. Just need some time to think. I'll handle things on my own for now." With that, she tossed her phone onto the couch and walked into the library. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, its amber light filtering through the tall windows. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound tomes, rare first editions, and family heirlooms. For years, this room had been her refuge, a place where she could escape from the world and immerse herself in the stories of others. But today, it felt cold, distant, almost unrecognizable. Emma moved to the large oak desk in the center of the room. It was a sturdy, imposing piece of furniture, much like the life she had built for herself, solid, unyielding, and full of ambition. But even this desk seemed to mock her now. She sat down heavily in the chair, the leather creaking under her weight. She stared at the papers and documents scattered across the desk, but none of them could capture her attention. Her mind was consumed by one thought: the man who had promised to love her, to cherish her, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And now she was faced with a choice: to let him continue to destroy her from within or to take back control of her life. There was no question in her mind. She would take back control. But how? As she pondered her next move, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. Emma frowned, curious but wary. She opened the message. It was from the same mysterious voice. "I know this is hard to process, Mrs. Blackwood. But I want you to understand something. You are not alone in this. There are people who want to see him fall. You have the power to make it happen. Don't let this go. Don't let him get away with it." The words were chilling. They were a reminder that Emma was not just a victim in this situation. She was a player in a game she hadn't even realized she was part of. The thought that someone else knew about Charles's infidelity, someone who had information she didn't have, left her feeling both vulnerable and empowered. What did they want from her? What was their angle? Her eyes scanned the email, searching for more clues, but there was nothing else. No name. No phone number. Just the cryptic message that hung in the air like a shadow she couldn't quite shake off. Emma closed the email and stared at the screen for a long moment. She wasn't sure whether to be thankful for the support or suspicious of the hidden motives behind it. But one thing was certain: this was no longer just about her. It was about something bigger than herself. It was about revenge, justice, and the reckoning that was long overdue. The plan begins. Emma spent the rest of the evening strategizing. Her fingers hovered over her laptop as she searched through public records, financial statements, and business documents. The world she had built was based on hard work, meticulous planning, and an unrelenting drive to succeed. She had made her millions through sharp instincts and calculated risks. Now, she would use those same skills to dismantle the life Charles had taken for granted. Her first move was to dig deeper into Charles's business dealings. She had always known that he was involved in various ventures, most of them under the radar, away from the prying eyes of the public. But Emma had never really questioned him about it. She trusted him. Foolishly, she now realized. She spent hours combing through the financial statements, searching for discrepancies, anything that could suggest foul play. The deeper she went, the more she uncovered: hidden accounts, shell companies, questionable investments. Charles had built a facade of success, but beneath it all, there were cracks. Emma's heart raced as she realized the extent of his dishonesty. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about a man who had been hiding things from her for years, deceiving her on every level. By the time the clock struck midnight, Emma had gathered a trove of evidence. She had found enough to bring Charles to his knees, to expose him for the fraud he was. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. She needed more. She needed something personal, something that would destroy him in a way that nothing else could. She thought about the woman in the photos, the one who had been with Charles for the past year. Who was she? What did she want? Emma had a feeling that uncovering the identity of this woman would be the key to unlocking everything. With a sense of determination, she picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It was a contact from her past, a private investigator who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Emma had worked with him on a few business matters in the past, but she had never asked him to dig into someone's personal life. She didn't know if he would take the job, but she didn't care. She needed answers. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Hello?" The voice was gruff, with the faintest hint of curiosity. "It's Emma Blackwood," she said, her tone direct. "I need you to find someone for me." There was a pause, followed by a low chuckle. "It's been a long time, Emma. What's the job?" "I need you to find out who Charles Blackwood has been seeing," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I need everything. Photos, names, background. I need to know everything about this woman." There was another pause. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Emma replied, her jaw set. "I want this woman found. And I want her to know who I am." The investigator didn't ask any more questions. He simply agreed to the job, and they hung up. A reckoning is coming. The following days passed in a blur. Emma's health began to deteriorate, as it inevitably would, but her focus remained razor-sharp. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the anger that burned within her. She wasn't going to let Charles, or anyone else, take away her dignity. Not now, not ever. She continued to piece together the puzzle of her marriage, uncovering layer after layer of lies, each one more damaging than the last. She was no longer the woman who had fallen in love with Charles all those years ago. The person she had been was gone, replaced by someone colder, more calculated. Someone who would stop at nothing to get justice. But there was still one question that gnawed at her: why? Why had Charles done this? Why had he betrayed her? He knew she was sick. He knew how much time they had left. Was this his way of dealing with his guilt, or was there something deeper at play? As the days wore on, Emma's plan began to take shape. She wasn't just going to confront Charles. She was going to destroy everything he had built. She was going to expose him for the fraud he truly was, both in business and in love. But there was still much to be done. She needed more evidence. She needed to be sure. And she wasn't going to stop until she had it all. The cold wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the Blackwood estate, but Emma was too absorbed in her thoughts to notice. She sat in the study, surrounded by stacks of papers, open laptops, and her notes that were filled with names, dates, and facts she had uncovered in the last few days. Each new discovery felt like a shard of glass being inserted into her skin, the pain sharp and immediate but also oddly satisfying, as though with each new revelation, she was inching closer to something powerful. A clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passing hours as Emma sipped from her half-empty glass of wine. She didn't care for wine much, but tonight she needed something to dull the edge of her thoughts. Her mind was in overdrive, and the more she uncovered about Charles and his secret life, the more it consumed her. She could feel it tightening around her like a noose. The private investigator, Jake, had finally called back, just as she had hoped. Emma leaned forward, eager to hear the news. She'd been waiting for days, and now, the truth was within reach. The phone buzzed on the desk, cutting through the silence. Emma immediately grabbed it and answered. "Jake," she said, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. "Tell me what you found." "Mrs. Blackwood," Jake's voice came through the phone, rough as ever. "I've got everything you asked for. It wasn't easy, but I've dug deep. You were right to trust me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you have?" "Her name is Tara Donovan. She's 33, works in marketing for a tech company based in Silicon Valley. She's been involved with Charles for the last 14 months. And I've got photos, text messages, everything you could want. But there's more." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Tara Donovan. The name felt foreign and yet eerily familiar. Charles had never mentioned her. But of course, he wouldn't. He was too busy hiding his betrayal. "What more?" Emma asked, her voice tight with impatience. Jake hesitated. "I've got something on her that you might not like. She's been in and out of therapy for some personal issues, but it's not what you're thinking. This isn't just a random affair, Emma. Tara has ties to someone who might be a problem for you. It's a whole other layer to this mess." Emma's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? Who is she tied to?" There was a long pause before Jake answered. "She's the niece of Gregory Hale. You know who he is, don't you? The venture capitalist." Emma's pulse quickened. She knew Gregory Hale all too well. He was a name whispered in the corridors of power and influence, a man whose wealth and connections ran deep, a man who had tangled with some of the most dangerous players in the business world. Gregory Hale was a man who didn't get involved in petty affairs or small schemes. If Tara Donovan was connected to him, it meant there was more at play than just an affair. "Are you saying?" Emma's voice trailed off as she processed the information. "Yes," Jake confirmed. "Tara isn't just some woman Charles picked up. She's part of a much larger game. Gregory Hale has been involved in several high-stakes deals with Charles in the past few years. And now, with the affair exposed, Hale could be using this situation to leverage something from Charles. It's all connected." Emma's mind reeled. Gregory Hale. This was no longer just a personal betrayal. This was a conspiracy, a calculated move in a much larger game. "Keep digging, Jake," Emma said, her tone sharp. "I need everything. I want to know exactly how deep this goes. And I want to know if Hale is involved in any of Charles's business dealings. If he's behind this, we need to be prepared." "Understood," Jake replied. "I'll be in touch soon with more details." Emma hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence for a moment. She had been prepared to confront Charles, to expose his infidelity for what it was, a betrayal, a break in the trust they had built over the years. But now, it wasn't just about Charles anymore. It was about something far more sinister, far more dangerous. If Gregory Hale was involved, if his influence was behind this, it meant that her life, and Charles's, was about to spiral into something far darker than either of them could have imagined. The calm before the storm. The following morning was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Emma had barely slept, her mind consumed by the new information. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was no longer the woman who had blindly trusted Charles. She was someone different now, harder, colder. Her eyes were sharper, the lines of her face drawn tight with the weight of what she was about to do. She had never been one to shy away from difficult decisions, but this was different. What she had learned in the last few days had opened up a whole new world of betrayal and deceit. Charles's infidelity was the tip of the iceberg. There were forces at play here that could destroy everything she had worked for. But Emma had no intention of being a victim. She was going to take control of her narrative. She was going to fight. She grabbed her phone and called her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Allison Hayes. It was time to prepare for the fallout. "Allison, I need to see you. We need to discuss my next move," Emma said as soon as the call connected. "I'll make time," Allison replied immediately. "I take it things are getting serious?" "More than I expected," Emma replied, her voice steady. "I need your help in getting everything in order for what's coming." The confrontation. A few hours later, Emma arrived at the law office. Allison greeted her with a firm handshake, her sharp eyes scanning Emma's face for signs of stress or weakness. Emma had always admired Allison's professionalism. She was a woman who didn't let emotions cloud her judgment. "I've been gathering information," Emma said as she sat down across from her lawyer. "I know everything about Tara Donovan. I know who she is, where she works, and who her uncle is. And now I need to know what I can do to take control of this situation." Allison nodded thoughtfully. "The fact that you have proof of the affair gives you leverage. But the connection to Gregory Hale complicates things. If he's involved, we need to be careful about how we proceed. This could go from a personal issue to something much larger, and I'm not sure you want to take him on directly, at least not yet." Emma looked at Allison, her jaw tight. "I'm not afraid of Hale. He's just another player in this game. But I need to know what my options are." Allison leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "First, you need to decide what you want from Charles. Do you want a divorce? Do you want to destroy his career? Or do you want to make him regret this affair? There are different strategies, depending on what your goals are." Emma's mind raced. She had considered all of these options, but now that she was sitting across from Allison, the reality of what she was about to do was beginning to hit her. She had no illusions about the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just about Charles or his betrayal, it was about taking down the empire they had built together. "I want everything," Emma said, her voice steady. "I want to take him down. I want to expose him, destroy his reputation, his career, and his life. I want to make him pay for everything he's done. And I want him to understand that he will never come out of this unscathed." Allison's eyes narrowed. "That's a dangerous game, Emma. But if you're serious, I'll help you make it happen. But remember, you have to be prepared for the consequences. If we go after Gregory Hale, we might be opening a door we can't close." Emma nodded. She had thought about the risks. But there was no turning back now. She had come too far to stop. "Let's do it," she said, her voice resolute. The Blackwood estate had never felt so silent. Emma sat in her private office, the sprawling view of the manicured garden outside the window offering little solace. The birds, once chirping in a lively chorus, seemed to have fallen mute, as if even nature could feel the heavy atmosphere inside the house. It was only the ticking of the antique clock on the wall and the hum of her laptop that filled the void. The room, once a place of comfort and peace, now felt more like a battlefield. Emma had always been someone who embraced control. Her life, her empire, everything she built was a product of calculated precision. But now, as she leaned back in her chair, the weight of the coming storm loomed over her like an approaching thundercloud. This was no longer about Charles or even about the affair, it was about power, influence, and dismantling the very structure that had given her life meaning. Charles, once the center of her world, was no longer her primary concern. Now, the game had shifted. Gregory Hale's involvement was the key, and Emma was ready to open the door to the unknown. She couldn't help but reflect on the chain of events that had brought her to this point. In the last few weeks, everything had changed. The betrayal, the affair, the revelation of Tara Donovan's connection to Gregory Hale, it was all a carefully woven web that had begun to unravel. Every piece she uncovered revealed something deeper, more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. But one thing remained clear: she wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't going to be the woman who allowed her life to be destroyed by the actions of those she trusted. She was going to be the one in control. She was going to take down everything that had been built on lies. The deepening web. Emma's lawyer, Allison Hayes, had been her ally through this entire ordeal. A no-nonsense woman who was both brilliant and ruthless, Allison had already started laying the groundwork for what was to come. Together, they had devised a multi-step strategy that would put the pressure on both Charles and Gregory Hale. But even as Emma reviewed the plan, her mind kept returning to the one thing that gnawed at her: Tara Donovan. The photos Jake had sent her showed Tara as a woman of seemingly unremarkable appearance. She was attractive but not overtly stunning. Her professional demeanor in the images seemed almost rehearsed. But Emma wasn't fooled. She had learned long ago that appearances meant little in the world she operated in. Tara's connection to Gregory Hale told Emma everything she needed to know about the woman's role in this tangled mess. What Emma didn't understand, though, was why Tara had chosen to involve herself with Charles in the first place. Gregory Hale was no amateur. If he was orchestrating something, he was doing it for a reason. And Tara? She wasn't simply some young woman looking for a fling. She had a role to play. As if on cue, Emma's phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Jake. "I've gotten more details on Tara's connection to Hale. She's been seen meeting with him in private. And there's something else you should know. Hale's not just involved in business deals with Charles. He's been trying to buy up some of your family's properties you hold in your name alone." Emma froze. This was new information. Hale had been trying to buy her properties? She hadn't noticed anything unusual, but now that she thought about it, there had been some strange inquiries into her assets recently. Small meetings with real estate agents. Subtle hints from Charles that they might be looking to expand their holdings. But Emma had always dismissed it as just another of Charles's business interests. Now, it felt like more than that. "What kind of deal are we talking about?" Emma typed back, her fingers flying across the keys. "It's not clear yet. But I'm looking into it. I'll keep you posted." Emma read the message again. This wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. This was about control. Hale wasn't just after Charles's life, he was after her empire. And that, Emma realized, was the last straw. Hale was playing a dangerous game, and he had underestimated her. She wasn't about to let anyone take away what was hers. The first move. A few days later, the plan was set in motion. Emma and Allison had spent hours finalizing their strategy. They had identified weak points in Charles's business operations, areas where he had made questionable decisions, areas where Gregory Hale's influence was most prominent. It was time to expose those vulnerabilities. The first step was to send a subtle but clear message to Charles: Emma was no longer the woman he could control. She wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. Emma drafted a letter, one that would hit Charles where it would hurt the most: his reputation. It was a carefully crafted document that accused Charles of financial misconduct, citing discrepancies in several of his recent investments. The letter was signed with a pseudonym, someone who would remain anonymous, but whose information was credible enough to cause a stir in the business world. The goal wasn't to end his career just yet, it was to shake him, to make him realize that Emma had the upper hand. Allison had connections within the financial world, people who would ensure that the letter found its way into the right hands. The media would be quick to pick up on it, and the resulting scandal would force Charles to answer questions he didn't want to face. But Emma wasn't content with just that. She had a far more personal move in mind. The confrontation with Charles. The night Emma chose to confront Charles had a sense of inevitability to it. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and now, the time had come. She had sent him a text earlier that evening, telling him that they needed to talk. Charles had been uncharacteristically quiet, but Emma knew he was nervous. He knew, deep down, that Emma had been holding back. That she hadn't let the affair go. Charles arrived at the estate just before midnight. His face was pale, his eyes guarded. He knew he was walking into the lion's den, and he was not ready for what was coming. Emma stood in the hallway, her back straight, her demeanor calm. She had never looked more composed in her life. This was her moment of power. She was no longer the woman who had loved him blindly. She was the woman who had built her life, her empire, from the ground up, and she was going to take it back. "Emma," Charles said, his voice almost pleading as he approached her. "We need to talk about this. I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." Emma's cold stare stopped him in his tracks. "Do you know what I've learned in the past few weeks, Charles?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "I've learned that everything I thought I knew about you was a lie." Charles opened his mouth to speak, but Emma cut him off. "No, don't say anything. I don't want to hear it. I know about Tara Donovan. I know about Gregory Hale. I know about your betrayal. And now, I know what you've been trying to do behind my back. You thought you could destroy me, didn't you?" Charles's face paled even further. His eyes darted around the room, as though looking for an escape, but there was none. The walls were closing in. "Emma, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I was going to tell you. I didn't know how." Emma's lips curled into a tight smile. "You didn't know how? You didn't know how to tell me that you've been living a double life, that you've been selling us out for your own gain?" Her voice rose with every word, each sentence sharp and deliberate. "You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I wouldn't see through the lies. But I've seen it all, Charles. And now, it's your turn to pay." She walked toward him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She was done with the games. Done with pretending. "I'm going to ruin you. Everything you've worked for will fall apart. And when it does, you'll know that it was because of your own actions. Your own choices." Charles's face was a mixture of shock and fear. He opened his mouth to protest, but Emma was already turning away. The decision had been made. The first strike had been launched. The consequences begin. The next few days were a whirlwind. The letter Emma had arranged to be leaked to the press caused an immediate stir in the business world. Rumors about Charles's financial misconduct spread like wildfire. The media caught wind of the story, and soon, investors were pulling out of his ventures. The board members of his companies began to distance themselves. The fall from grace was swift and brutal. Emma watched it all unfold from the comfort of her office, a glass of champagne in her hand as she observed the destruction she had set in motion. This was only the beginning. She knew that Charles would come crawling back, desperate to repair the damage. But he had no idea just how deep Emma's plan went. This wasn't just about his career. It was about everything he held dear. And Emma was going to take it all. The game had begun. And Emma was playing to win. The storm that had been brewing for weeks finally broke. Emma stood by the large bay windows in the Blackwood estate, staring out into the night. The rain lashed against the glass, its relentless rhythm a perfect reflection of the storm that raged within her. It had been 3 days since Charles's financial scandal had broken, and the effects were already rippling through his life like shockwaves. His reputation was in tatters, his business partners turning their backs on him one by one. Emma could feel it, he was unraveling, his control slipping away. But it wasn't enough. She wanted more. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. The name on the screen made her pause for just a moment. Jake. She hadn't spoken to him in a few days, but she knew he had been working on something important. "Jake," Emma said as she picked up the phone. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that only someone who knew her well would notice. "Emma, Jake's voice crackled through the line, tense but with a hint of urgency. "I've got news. It's not good. You need to hear this." Her heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" "I dug deeper into Hale's business dealings," Jake continued, his words quick and measured. "And I found something that's going to change everything." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was more at stake than just Charles's affair. Hale's involvement had always been the key, and now Jake was about to reveal something that could either be her salvation or her undoing. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind raced with possibilities. Jake hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, his words clipped. "Hale has been laundering money through several of his companies that have been in direct dealings with Charles. And here's the kicker. One of those companies is owned by you. Your name is tied to a series of investments, and I'm not talking small ones. We're talking millions, Emma. If this gets out, it could take you down too." Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Hale's involvement was one thing, but her name being linked to illegal financial dealings? That was an entirely different beast. Her entire empire could collapse with one wrong move. "You're sure about this?" Emma asked, her voice hardening. "I need all the details. I need to know how deep this runs." "I'll send you everything," Jake replied. "But you need to act fast. If Hale catches wind of this, he'll make sure to bury you before you can get a word out." Emma's mind was already working overtime, processing everything Jake had just told her. She knew she had to be cautious. The last thing she wanted was to be caught in a scandal that wasn't of her making. But at the same time, she couldn't let Hale continue to pull the strings behind the scenes. If this was going to be a battle, it was time to go all in. "Get me that information, Jake," Emma said, her voice cold with resolve. "And in the meantime, I'm going to take a different approach with Charles. We're going to finish this once and for all. The reckoning begins." It was time to confront Charles, not in a cold, calculated way, as she had done before, but with the full force of everything she had learned. Emma knew that she couldn't keep hiding behind strategy forever. The time had come to make her intentions clear. She was going to take him down, not just for the affair, but for everything he had done to betray her. When Charles arrived at the estate that evening, he was a shadow of the man he had once been. His face was drawn, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. He had been desperate in the days since the scandal broke, but Emma knew it was all an act. She had seen that look on his face before, the one he wore when he thought he could still win, still manipulate his way out of trouble. But not this time. Emma waited for him in the sitting room, the same place where they had shared countless conversations, dreams, and plans for the future. Now, it felt like a funeral parlor. Charles stepped in cautiously, his eyes immediately searching for some sign of familiarity, some indication that he still held the power in this relationship. But Emma wasn't the woman he had married anymore. She was someone new. "Emma," he said, his voice hesitant, unsure. "We need to talk." "Talk?" Emma echoed, standing slowly from her seat. "There's nothing left to talk about, Charles. You've made your choices. You've chosen her over me. You've chosen your lies over everything we built together. And now, you've involved people who are far more dangerous than either of us could have imagined." Charles flinched at her words, but he tried to regain his composure. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry." Emma's eyes hardened. "Sorry? You think an apology is going to fix this? You think that after everything I've uncovered, I'm just going to let you off the hook with some empty words?" "I didn't know how to fix it," Charles said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I tried to keep it all under control, but everything started spiraling out of control. I never wanted you to find out." Emma stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. You didn't want me to find out? You didn't want me to find out that you've been cheating on me for over a year? That you've been building your empire on lies, on deceit, on the back of my hard work? And now I find out you've been involved in illegal business dealings with Gregory Hale. You've crossed a line, Charles. This isn't just about betrayal anymore. Charles's face went white. You don't understand. Hale. I understand perfectly, Emma interrupted, her voice sharp. Hale's been playing you. He's been using you. And you've let him do it because you were too blinded by greed and power to see what was right in front of you. Charles stumbled backward, shaking his head. I never meant for it to go this far. Emma took a step forward, her voice lowering but becoming more dangerous. You're right. You didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did. And now, you're going to pay for everything. I'm not just going to destroy you, Charles. I'm going to take everything you've worked for. Your empire, your career, everything. And when I'm done, you'll understand what it feels like to lose it all. Charles's eyes flickered with panic. You can't do this. You don't know what Hale will do. If you try to go against him, you'll ruin everything. You'll destroy yourself too. Emma's lips curled into a cold smile. I've already started the process. The wheels are in motion, Charles. The question now is whether you're going to get in my way or step aside. The truth comes out. The next day, Emma sat at her desk, going over the files Jake had sent her. The information he had uncovered was damning. Hale's money laundering operations were tied to multiple companies, all with her name on them. Her heart sank as she read through the documents. But instead of panicking, she felt the familiar stirrings of rage that was now focused on the right target. The scandal she had unleashed about Charles's financial misdeeds had distracted the media for the time being, but Hale's name was still looming over everything. He was the puppet master, pulling the strings, and Emma knew she had to expose him for what he truly was. But it couldn't be done recklessly. Hale had too many allies, too much power. Emma leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. It was time to push forward. She needed to gather her allies, those who still owed her favors, and start planning her next move. She called Allison, her lawyer, and laid out the next step of their strategy. We're going after Hale. I want everything on him, the money laundering, the business dealings with Charles, and everything else that can tie him to criminal activities. It's time for him to face the consequences. Allison's voice was steady on the other end. I'll get to work on it. But you need to be careful, Emma. Hale won't take this lying down. If he comes after you, it could be worse than anything Charles could have done. I'm ready for him, Emma replied, her voice icy. Let's finish this. The mansion was quieter than usual, the silence settling over the sprawling estate like a heavy fog. Emma sat at her desk, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her face as she pored over the documents spread before her. The more she read, the tighter her grip on the papers became. Every page, every transaction tied to Gregory Hale, each figure that seemed to intertwine her life with his darker dealings, filled her with an almost primal fury. The lines between business and personal were now completely blurred, and there was no going back. It had been weeks since she first uncovered the corruption behind her husband's affair and the conspiracy that lay beneath it. What began as a personal vendetta against Charles had turned into something far greater, a battle for her life, her empire, and her sanity. And with every revelation that she uncovered about Hale's involvement in money laundering and business manipulations, Emma realized that she had more to lose than she had anticipated. Her phone buzzed across the desk, breaking her train of thought. A single glance at the screen told her everything she needed to know. It was Jake. Her pulse quickened, and her fingers trembled slightly as she answered. Jake, Emma said, her voice firm but carrying an edge of impatience. What have you got for me? I've been digging deeper, Emma, Jake's voice came through, tense. It's worse than we thought. Hale's operation isn't just limited to your properties. He's deeply involved in several offshore accounts that have ties to your family's legacy. If this gets out, if this hits the right people, you could lose everything. He's been playing both sides. What I'm trying to tell you is, we've underestimated him. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had known Hale was dangerous, but the depths of his corruption had surpassed her expectations. He wasn't just trying to ruin Charles, he was going after her family, her heritage, and her empire. She couldn't allow this. Is there any way to turn this around? She asked, trying to steady her voice. I'm putting together all the evidence. But Emma, I'm telling you right now, we need leverage. We need something that will hit Hale where it hurts. Right now, he's untouchable, but there's got to be a weak link somewhere. We need to find it. Emma sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Leverage. That was the key. She had to find a way to expose Hale without putting herself directly in harm's way. Hale was a calculating man, and while she knew he had vulnerabilities, he would not be easy to topple. But Emma had one thing he didn't: resources, allies, and the will to fight. I'll take care of it. You just keep digging, Emma said, her voice cold with determination. Let me know what you find. She hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair. The tension in her body was palpable, but she knew she had to remain calm. She had been playing this game for too long to let it unravel now. Her empire, everything she had worked for, was at risk, and Emma was no stranger to risk. The underground network. Emma knew she couldn't take on Gregory Hale alone. The stakes were simply too high, and Hale's influence ran too deep. But she had connections, people who owed her favors, people who had been in her corner long before this war had started. It was time to call them in. Her first call was to Allison, her trusted lawyer. Allison had been working tirelessly to find a legal route to stop Hale and Charles's growing influence in Emma's life. But this wasn't just about the law anymore, this was about survival. Emma needed to make sure that no stone was left unturned, no avenue unexplored. Get me a meeting with Thomas Wickham, Emma instructed Allison over the phone. You know who he is, right? Allison's voice was steady, but Emma could hear the hesitation. Wickham is a high-profile financier, Emma. He has connections in the government, on both sides of the aisle. You want to get him involved? I don't just want to get him involved, Emma replied, her voice dripping with intensity. I need him. I need someone who has enough sway to make Hale nervous. Someone who can disrupt his plans without him even realizing it. Wickham has been buying up properties around my land for the last year, right under my nose. He's been part of Hale's scheme from the beginning. All right, Allison said reluctantly. I'll make the call. But be careful, Emma. Wickham's reputation isn't exactly clean. Emma smiled, though it was more of a tight-lipped grimace. No one with power has a clean reputation. We're not looking for clean. We're looking for results. The devil's bargain. The meeting with Thomas Wickham took place at a private club downtown, a place where power, money, and influence collided. Wickham was a man who thrived in the shadows, a financier who had his hands in everything from real estate to political corruption. He was the type of man who didn't care where the money came from, as long as it kept flowing. When Emma walked into the dimly lit room, Wickham was already waiting, a glass of scotch in hand. He was a tall man with a sharp jawline and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His presence was imposing, and as Emma approached him, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Emma Blackwood, Wickham greeted her, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought your hands were full with your husband's little scandal. I don't have time for pleasantries, Wickham, Emma said, cutting straight to the point. I need your help. And if you want to stay on top, you'll help me. Wickham raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. He took a slow sip of his drink, considering her words. I know about your dealings with Gregory Hale, Emma continued. I know that you've been buying up properties that are connected to my family's land, and I know you've been working with him on some of his more unsavory ventures. I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm asking you to pick a side. Either you help me, or you can kiss your empire goodbye. Wickham leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You think you can scare me, Emma? You think you can come in here and demand my loyalty? I'm not asking for your loyalty, Emma replied coldly. I'm offering you a choice. You help me take down Hale, or you lose everything. Your business, your connections, everything. Wickham stared at her for a moment, and then he smirked. You've got guts. I'll give you that. All right, I'm listening. What do you want me to do? Breaking point. With Wickham's agreement in place, Emma knew it was only a matter of time before Hale's empire began to crack. The man had thought himself invincible, but he had underestimated the network of people who had been quietly watching him for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. The plan was simple. Emma would use Wickham's resources to leverage a public confrontation between Hale and one of his closest allies in the government, someone who was directly involved in his illegal operations. By exposing this person, they would unravel Hale's carefully constructed empire, forcing him into a corner. The threat of exposure would drive him into a public scandal from which he couldn't recover. Emma's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Jake. I've got the final piece. Hale's money is being funneled through a series of offshore accounts tied to the same government official who's been working with him. This is the break we needed. I'll be at your place in an hour with the details. Emma felt a surge of triumph, but she knew it was too early to celebrate. The final move was still ahead, and it was one that would determine the fate of everything she had worked for. When Jake arrived an hour later, Emma sat with him in her study, the weight of the information they had gathered hanging in the air like a ticking time bomb. We're ready, Jake said, his voice low. We expose Hale's connections, and the government officials' ties will unravel with him. The media will have no choice but to take notice. Emma nodded slowly. It's now or never. I'm going to call in every favor I have left, and I'm going to make sure Hale's world collapses around him. He'll have nowhere to hide. The moment of truth. The media storm broke the next morning. It started with a well-placed article that highlighted the corruption surrounding Gregory Hale, detailing his financial ties to a series of government officials, including the one who had been quietly laundering his money. Emma's carefully orchestrated plan was in motion. The whispers spread through the political elite like wildfire. The fallout was immediate. Hale's allies started distancing themselves from him. Key players in his operations suddenly vanished, and his public image, carefully crafted for years, began to crumble. It was the beginning of the end. Emma watched the storm unfold from her office. The call she had been waiting for finally came, a call that confirmed that Gregory Hale's empire had already begun to crack. The walls were closing in, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But Emma wasn't finished yet. She was going to make sure that Hale would never rise again. Not while she still had breath in her body.